right, folks. We're going to get started here. My name is Amanda Peterson. I'm with Oregon Area Progressives. Welcome to the open mic night. This happens once a month, the first Friday of every month. And we're happy tonight to have the cable access taping this so it can be reshown later in case you have friends that wanted to see it and couldn't be here tonight. You can spread the word. You can live stream it. There's a YouTube channel for OCA Media. And they will also show it on the cable access channels locally. Let's see. A couple of announcements quick. We are doing, the Oregon Area Progressives is helping to coordinate a Fair Maps for Wisconsin Summit. It is Saturday, November 9th of this year, so save that date. It's in Marshfield, Wisconsin at the Marshfield Hotel. It's an all-day conference. There are details on our website, and you can also go to fairmaps, the number 4, wisummit.com. And either tickets are $50, and if you have, we're especially trying to reach people in other congressional districts in Wisconsin, far reaches, rural areas, activists that we want to come to this summit and learn how to be activists and press for fair maps in this state to end gerrymandering.
Can you give that website again?
Yep, there's little cards up at the front. Just grab one of these, but it's Fair Maps, the number 4, wisummit.com. And spread the word on that so we get a nice variety of people from all over the state. The other thing is, after tonight's presentation Q&A session, we have opened up the mic to people and their slips. Nancy is walking around with some. If you want to speak, fill out one of these and they will get it to me because I'm the MC, and we'll get people out. I'll call them up in order, and you get the mic for about 3 minutes, and you can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be political or anything. Just if you have a rant or you want to comment on something, or you have an event coming up that you want to announce. And please stick around for those, because I know we're going to have some especially good, interesting comments tonight. So stay around after the Q&A. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, who is also a professor of history at Carthage College. And she is going to talk, and your co-founder of Voces de la, co-president, sorry. Okay, there. You can. Yeah, you know, we could do it. You know it better than I do. But yeah, so very qualified, has a lot of interesting things to tell us, and maybe can let us know what we can do to help all the way over here in Oregon. Please. So take it away. This is a better night. All right. Thank you. Warm welcome.
Good evening. It really is a pleasure to be here.
Can everybody hear in the back?
I confess I'd never heard of Oregon, the town. When I got the email, I thought that's a little ways to travel, you know.
But it's Oregon.
It's Oregon.
Oregon, the town.
Oregon.
Oregon, the state.
Oregon is the state, and Oregon is the town and the village. Well, it's gorgeous here. And my GPS took me through the country the whole way. It's absolutely beautiful coming out here. It's just a real pleasure. And especially in this time and place, we need to stick together, right? These are very special times. I'm an historian, as Amanda said, and these are very special times. So I'm an historian of Latin America. I'm a Latin Americanist. That's what I do. I also, because of these very strange times that we live in, have ended up working a lot with detainees, asylum seekers, and residents. And so I'm going to talk with you about a few topics. The first one is going to be just a little bit of background in answer to the question, crises, what crises, right? The immigration crises, what's a real crisis and what's a manufactured crisis, right? And then the second thing that I want to talk about is what's actually happening in Wisconsin, locally at our own detention centers. And then third, I'll just talk a little bit about conditions in detention, what it's like to be in detention in Wisconsin, and some of the things that are not so much fun that I've learned working with detainees. And I don't want to talk for too long because I would really like to get your questions. My suspicion is that since you're here, you probably already know a little bit about what's going on, and I don't want to give you information that you already have. So I'll try and keep my comments pretty brief and then open it up to questions and maybe be able to answer, I hope. So let's start out with the question about, what crises are real and what are manufactured. The crises in Central America is, as you would probably imagine, those are completely real. Honduras, Guatemala, Salvador, Nicaragua are all experiencing real crises. They're not the same crisis, but they're similar. They're interconnected. Certainly Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras are all experiencing crises that have to do with organized crime, transnational organized crime, a lot of it which is deeply connected to the United States. What's going on in Nicaragua has a little bit more to do with the particular nutcase who's in charge of Nicaragua right now. As I imagine you all know, the roots of the instability in that region go way back. Some of you may remember the first sanctuary movement before the new sanctuary movement happened back in the 80s when the United States was fighting civil wars in the region. But of course the origins of those conflicts were older than that, right? You can go back to the colonial period if you really want to start with where things began to go wrong in that region. But certainly since the late 19th century, there has been an economic system that's been set up that's absolutely tied to the United States, markets in the United States, an economic system that was based on export, that benefited a few in those regions and harmed the many. And it's all about land in that region, and the few gobbling up the land in order to generate profit from those export goods, right? So in the late 19th century, that was coffee, right? And here lately it's drugs. But it's a similar pattern in that they are export-oriented goods destined for markets that are in the United States. So essentially, almost forever, the problems in Central America, they're not caused by the United States, but they're connected to issues in the United States. These are very connected regions. I think you feel that more palpably when you're in Central America than you do when you're here, right? The United States seems capable of ignoring Central America for decades at a time and then suddenly remembers, oh yeah, Central America is there. So we have an interrelated set of problems, these transnational networks of organized crime that are deeply connected to these transnational gangs, which have infiltrated all levels of government. So you have petty corruption, and you also have now massive corruption. The head of state of Honduras has just been shown to have run his campaign essentially off of money that was given to him by one of the major gangs, right? So you have corruption that is infiltrating the systems of government from the smallest policeman to the president, right? Making it extremely difficult for ordinary citizens to get around. The gangs, because they've infiltrated government, are able to essentially prevent structures of law and order from functioning at all. And they make a lot of their money just off of extorting people. So anybody to do any kind of business in this region is going to be at the mercy of these corrupt organized crime networks. We have this on top of plenty of ordinary poverty, right? But the combination of the corruption and the poverty and the violence makes a lot of people, even if you haven't actually been yourself the victim of an attack by one of these gangs, the prospects of your future can look pretty bleak. So we have people leaving this region, flooding out of this region in a way they just haven't been until fairly recently. And that's why you're seeing these crazy numbers on our borders, 100,000 people in a month trying to come to the United States. It's a combination of that violence and the corruption and the sense of there just not being any future here for me or for my family, right? We can talk about that more later. I know plenty of people who have been victims of all of those problems and can talk to you about them if you're interested. So that's a real crisis. Let's talk about some things that are not real crises. In the first place, all of those problems do have solutions. There are people who know how to solve problems when governance structures fall apart. We're not working very hard on those solutions right now. There seems to be no political will either in Central America or in the United States or really anywhere else to foot the bill and pay politically and economically for the kinds of things that we know could solve those kinds of problems. But at least they're real, as opposed to the so-called problems for which we need the roundups inside of this country. So we'll talk in a little bit about how that's a completely different population, largely not Central American, largely Mexican. People who've been here on average far more than 10 years, right? Who have families in the United States, who have been our neighbors for a very long time, children and grandchildren now, who are all US citizens, and are getting rounded up in these ICE actions in our communities, right? That is definitely not a crisis. The nonsense about the border wall is also not a crisis. And here's a little factoid I'd love for you to spread around to everybody you know, that the immigration from Mexico has been a negative number for a very, very long time, right? This idea that we need a wall to keep the Mexicans out is not only offensive, but also absurd, right? And of course, you probably also know that actual criminals are something like 6 times more likely to be apprehended on our northern border than our southern border, but somehow or other nobody seems to be proposing that we build a wall to separate the United States from Canada. Right, so that is an entirely manufactured crisis, and so is the one having to do with the supposed criminal aliens among our midst. My guess is, though, that most of you knew a lot of that, although if you want me to go into more detail, I'm happy to. Let's move to what's actually happening here in Wisconsin. So both of those populations, Latin Americans, mostly Mexicans, who've been living in our communities for a very long time, having to do with mostly economic crises that happened in Mexico for a variety of reasons, some of it as banal as bad weather, other things more complicated like NAFTA, which wiped out a lot of the agricultural sector back in the 90s in Mexico, led to people seeking opportunity in the north, as has been the case at different points in our joint country's history, right? We've had people coming north and seeking work here. That has never been a particular problem for the United States. There are costs that we can talk about if you want to kind of line up the pros and the cons of accepting immigrants for economic reasons. They tend to lean towards pros for the United States. Not that there are no costs, but I'm happy to go into that later if you like. But that is absolutely not a crisis. But what is going on, of course, is that ICE is targeting members of our community. We had 30 taken from Racine. I live in Kenosha and go to church in Racine. 2 members of my congregation in my church have been taken. Every time somebody is taken, the collateral damage from that is something I think that a lot of people don't see unless you're affected by it. But you remove one breadwinner from one family, and it just goes on and on. I met a woman in the detention center whose husband had been picked up a year ago. Something like 10 years before that, he'd been caught with a joint in his car, and so he was a criminal alien, right? So he'd been locked up in the Kenosha Detention Center for a year. She's a mom with 3 kids. She lost her home first, and then she lost her car. And after the first few months, she'd lost something like 40 pounds too. She found herself wandering out Sheridan Road, just kind of hoping that a car would hit her. So you think about that, okay, 3 kids. What's the impact on those kids? What's going to be the impact on those kids in 20 years? The trauma that they suffered as children, right? Because their dad and their source of income was taken and their mom kind of lost it, right? On top of losing your house and your car, right? I think people are not necessarily realizing that you can't just take one person out of a community and not have the effects just kind of ripple out from that. I have a friend who was taken, who was also incarcerated for a whole year before he finally was deported. He's got 7 kids, right? He used to run the business while his wife did the work for the business. And he did most of the child care, and now she's responsible for running the business, working the business, caring for the 7 kids, and by the way, his aging parents, right? You might, not be surprised to find out that a lot of these kids end up needing extra help and care, mental health bills, piling up on a family that once again just lost their breadwinner. It's a real crisis, but it's not the kind of crisis that we're hearing about, right? It's a manufactured crisis, and it really is hitting our community. But it's totally different from the crisis that's going in Central America. These groups of people have absolutely nothing to do with one another. Inside of Mexico, there is a dynamic that's not too dissimilar from the one that happens inside of the United States, where older residents whose immigrant forebears came, a generation or 2 back, look down upon and discriminate against newer migrants, right, from Mexico. Well, in Mexico, that happens against Central Americans, right? So Guatemalans, especially anybody whose physiology looks indigenous, are going to be looked down upon and also hunted down, rounded up, and deported from Mexico. So these 2 populations, Central Americans and Mexicans, not only do they have this strange dynamic from the region, right, where you've got quite a bit of tension and racism between the 2 groups, but they just don't have much in common. And yet, because the southern border's detention facilities are insufficient to house the number of Central American migrants that are coming across the border, they're getting shipped north, and they're turning up in Dodge County and KCDC, which are the 2 detention centers in Wisconsin that house ICE detainees. So I thought we would sort of move on then to what's happening in Wisconsin. I just said that there's 2 facilities where these 2 very different populations are housed together. So you've got mostly Mexicans who probably have some English. They've got family in our area. They probably got, spouse and kids on the outside, right? And roots here. And they're in the same bunker then with people from Central America who were often picked up while they're still dripping wet from having crossed the Rio Grande, right? And thrown into they call them the hieleras, the ice boxes, right? And so you've got mostly Mexicans who have the trauma of having their entire lives and their children's well-being thrown at risk, right? And this very recent shock of your life being upended, right? And you're thrown into jail. And you're next to somebody who's living with a completely different kind of trauma, right? Something forced you to leave your home back in Central America. You often have the trauma of the crossing from Central America to the southern border of the United States, which is just awful. Or very expensive. It's about $10,000 right now, if you don't do it on foot, right? And then, of course, you're in a brand new country, you don't speak English, you're completely bewildered as to what's happening to you. There's a lot of corruption of our own agents on the border trying to get people to sign their own deportation orders or say things in their interview that they didn't really say, right? So this completely bewildering system where you don't understand what's going on at all. And then you're on your first airplane ride ever, and you're taken to this place where it snows, which is not something you've ever seen before, right? And thrown in a cell with a Mexican, right? Who's just in a completely different situation. And those are the two broad populations. We do have people from other parts of the world in our detention centers. It's not just those two. Those are the two groups that I know the most about because I'm a Latin Americanist and those are the people that I work with. But we have Iraqis and we have Sudanese and we have all kinds of people in our detention centers in Wisconsin. So that agreement, why do we have, federal ICE detainees in our jails, comes from an earlier agreement that predated all of this nonsense. It seemed more innocuous, where the U.S. Marshals signed an agreement with these detention facilities to house federal inmates that, let's say the U.S. Marshals have somebody on their most wanted list and they find them, they can put them in one of our detention centers. Well, ICE just sort of piggybacked on that deal, and since they're technically federal inmates, they put all of these ICE detainees then into our detention centers. Both of ours are public, they're not private, which is good because the private ones are even worse. But to say that it's a public facility doesn't actually mean that there's no private money being made there. So I'd like to talk just real quick about the kind of money that's being made off of the detention business, and it is a business in Wisconsin. So the first has to do with the private companies that make crazy amounts of money off of even public facilities like the two that we have in Dodge County and in Kenosha County. So for example, if you want to speak on the phone with somebody in detention, the first place, you can't call them, they have to call you, and you have to pay for the call. And it's really expensive. And there's a private company in Kenosha, it's called GTL, and you have to pay them, and the service is terrible, and it costs you $6 to make a deposit into your own account. They charge you to pay them money, and then of course they charge you for the phone call, and heaven forbid your account runs out and you have to accept a collect call, because then they charge you twice as much. It's crazy. They also kind of deliberately serve not just terrible food, but food that people from Mexico and Central America will especially hate in the regular dining options. And then they put things like tortillas in the commissary, which are for sale, right? And so the only way you can buy the tortillas, which don't make you gag, is if somebody puts money in your commissary account, all right? So there's 101 ways. If you want to visit somebody, they've just recently canceled visitation at the KCDC, saying that, well, everybody else is doing it, we should do it too. Now you can only do video visits, and of course, that's another private company, and you have to pay for those. They nickel and dime you absolutely at every turn. Okay, now this is going to make a real difference then in those two populations, because which of those populations is likely to have a family member in the United States with a credit card or a debit card and enough English to figure out how to work that system to put money in your commissary account? That's going to be the Mexicans, right? Central Americans who just crossed the river, who may or may not have a family member living in the United States, are not going to get to eat any tortillas unless they find a nice Mexican who's willing to help them out, right? Those two populations are going to have an even bigger line drawn between them inside of the detention center, just because of the nature of the business of detention, right? Another thing that's really challenging is just being able to make that phone call, all right? So if you have a family member, if your wife is in Milwaukee, right, she's obviously going to put money in the phone account so that you can call her, right? What if you don't have a family member on the outside? Or what if you have one, but they're in California and they maybe don't even know it's you when you try to call them, collect, and maybe they're scared. They don't want ICE to know that they exist, and maybe it's just your mother's sister-in-law or whatever, right? So that happens a lot too, where if you're a Central American and you come, not only do you not get to eat any food in the commissary, but you can't even make any phone calls out, right? Which, by the way, is going to make it really difficult to litigate your case for asylum, which is typically what the Central Americans are doing, right? They're mostly trying to make claims for asylum. But of course, you don't have any right to a lawyer. And even if you have the money to pay for one, how are you supposed to find one in this bewildering new country where you don't even speak the language and you can't even make a phone call to your mom's sister-in-law who lives in Queens, right? So that's by design, because with any luck, you will just sit there and nobody will find out that you're there, and then your court dates will come and you will go before the judge, and the judge will say, well, what evidence do you have? And you will say, well, I can't call anybody in Honduras. And the judge says, well, try, and they send you back to jail, and you sit there and you play some more cards and you watch some more TV, and then, you have another date. Do you have any evidence? No, Your Honor, right? How am I supposed to communicate with anybody in my home country who could maybe get some evidence for me? And then your last court date comes along, and then you get deported, right? And that happens every day. These people are stuck right here in our neighborhoods, right, without any way to contact anybody on the outside. And they're just waiting, biding their time until they get deported. Now, many of them are able to persuade a judge, let's say they've got like scars all over their body, or they have a persuasive story, to be given an immigration bond, which is a little bit like bail, but not quite. The lowest bond is $1,500. A judge cannot give you a bond that's lower than $1,500. So how are you supposed to get the money if you can't even make a phone call, right? But if somebody walks in and is willing to pay a bond, the average that I'm coming across is about $5,000, not $1,500. I've only had one that was $1,500. Well, then you get out, right? And then you can, get a job and earn some money and call your mom and say, could you please go get the hospital records of Uncle so-and-so's murder and send them to me? And she says, of course. And then you have a chance, right? You can pay a lawyer, and you can have a chance. If you're Mexican, it's better, but not good, right? The ways that it's better is you probably do have family on the outside and neighbors, and maybe your church is willing to do a fundraiser and put some money together and get you a lawyer, which makes you something like 5 times more likely to be successful in court. Or maybe they can pay your bond and you can get out and you can put together some kind of strategy and see if there's any way that you can stay. But of course, people like my friend with the 7 kids, you would have thought he had a great case, and he's now making a life for himself in Guadalajara without his kids, without his parents, without his wife. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. And who gained? Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody. And the cost will just go on and on and on, right? On and on and on. Damage done to those kids you won't be able to undo. You can't steal somebody's daddy. You can't handcuff somebody's daddy in front of them, right, when they're 9 and expect them to get over it, because they won't, right? And who's going to pay that cost aside from that little boy? Well, that'll be the rest of us, because those are U.S. citizens. They are ours, yeah? And we will all pay for that for a long time. So last topic would be life in detention. I've already talked a little bit about life in detention. It sucks. They wake you up. Now I'm talking about the KCDC because that's where I know everybody, right? They wake you up at the crack of dawn, get you out, and take you in to eat a breakfast that is unfamiliar to you. I have yet to meet a Central American who knew what grits were, right? And frankly, without salt, ew. So you're marched in and you're supposed to eat breakfast. And then you're sent back to your bunk where you're supposed to go to sleep again. So why did they wake you up at 5 or 6 o'clock to make you eat breakfast if you're supposed to get back in bed and go to sleep for another few hours? It's not like you had anything urgent that you have to do. And while you're doing all of this, moving from here to there are all of these very special rules. You can't speak, for example, after breakfast. You must maintain silence. And guess what happens to you if you do speak after breakfast? You will get punished. Guess what? No. Segregation is the nice word for it. Yeah. It's solitary confinement, my friends. That's the punishment for speaking after breakfast. Same punishment, in fact, for any infraction of the rules, such as leaving your Bible on your bed when you were supposed to have put it on the table or something like that. I don't know where you were supposed to put your Bible, but it wasn't on your bed, right? And you get thrown in the hole for that. So at the Kenosha County Detention Center, they have 2 kinds of isolation chambers, and the one isn't so bad. The one is at least in your bunker. So you can kind of see that there are people through the glass. You can kind of see that there are people that are still in the world with you. And you can hear. You're isolated from everybody else, but you're at least kind of in the same place as other people. There's another place that is called the hole because it is a literal hole in the ground. It's in a different part of the prison. You're taken completely away from everybody else. They don't turn out the lights, and they do turn on the air conditioning. So you are cold, and you have fluorescent lights on you, and so of course you can't sleep. They don't give you anything to keep warm with. And those are for horrible infractions of the rules, like speaking out of turn. I think the complaints that I hear the most often, though, have to do not with physical treatment, but kind of emotional. There's a lot of racism that goes in. There are some terrific guards at the Kenosha County Detention Center who really do try to make life less miserable for the people that they're treating, but there are plenty who are just racist jerks, and they call the immigrant detainees terrible things like rats, vermin, and it feels really bad to be treated like this. They will shout in English at the detainees. They don't provide translators inside of the detention center, so they're really leaning on that population that's been here for a while to do all of the interpreting for the newcomers from Central America. And that's kind of hit or miss because you're just depending on the goodwill of people who happen to be stuck in there with you. So the racism, the general unfairness of being locked up, there's not any different protocol really for someone who's locked up for immigration than somebody who's locked up in the same jail for having committed a crime, even a violent crime. And sometimes you're together. Sometimes there are scary people that you're locked up with. You're supposed to keep them separate, but they don't always. And so you're being treated like a criminal. And if you were fleeing Central America because you have been the victim of crime, which is very often the case, then what has happened is you have been victimized by criminals in your home country. You were very likely victimized by criminals on the road to the United States, probably more than once, and then you get locked up and treated like a criminal. So this basic unfairness is something that pretty much everybody I've worked with talks about, how difficult it is to deal emotionally with knowing that you haven't done anything wrong, and yet you're being treated as though you need to somehow pay some debt to society and the general kind of hopelessness of how am I ever going to get out? There is no way for me to get out. I'm going to be shipped back, and the likelihood of that being lethal, may be high. Everybody that I've worked with has, at some time or another, made some comment to me saying, I'd rather die than stay in this prison. And the good people who do the spiritual work in the prisons, when I commented that to them, they said, oh, everybody says that. They all say that. They'd all rather die than be in here. And of course, the only facilities that I have any firsthand knowledge of are the public ones, which are the good ones, right? We're lucky not to have any of those in Wisconsin. So that's it for my remarks. I would like to open it up to questions. I'm really interested in wanting to know what you'd like to know more about. We seem to have one in the back.
Yeah, so the way we do this, Nancy runs around with a portable mic and I'll say that.
So if you have a question, if you could give your name and where you're from and your question. Thank you. I'm going to Barb.
See. My name is Barb Feeney, and I live in the town of Rutland. And my question is, what, if anything, is it that ordinary people like us can do to be helpful to people in detention centers?
I am so happy you asked that question. I can't even tell you. And this is on. I'm afraid this is as good as it gets. Would you rather I shout?
Shout into the mic.
Shout into the mic?
There you go.
Can you turn it up at all?
I don't know, Ro, is there a way to, he's our sound guy tonight.
If we've got a soundboard, that might be possible. So I wanted to begin the answer to that question by saying that we have pro-immigrant organizations in Wisconsin, like Voces de la Frontera, that I'm a member of. None of them is particularly set up to deal with these crises, the manufactured type, right? We have been kind of just hit with this, right? And the needs are way more than the organizations are able to handle. So for example, Voces de la Frontera has been an advocacy group forever. It is primarily about trying to change the system. We're trying really hard right now to get driver's licenses reinstated in Wisconsin because the number one way that those longtime residents are getting entrapped really into the system of detention is because they can't apply for a driver's license. And the law has been fixed so that you get like 3 driving without a license, or even just like 1 driving without a license and 1 your tire touched the yellow line and I represented a woman one time whose license plate was crooked. No, it was laminated. It was laminated. Another guy said he got stopped for it being crooked. Right? Oh, 3, that's a felony in Wisconsin. Now you're a criminal alien, and now he can deport you, right? I mean, it's this crazy system. So it doesn't help anything. Like all of these things, it doesn't help anybody, right? Everybody hurts, nobody wins. So Voces de la Frontera is mostly about trying to change those big structural things, right? What are you supposed to do if there's just a guy from Honduras who's stuck in the detention center and doesn't have any money for bond? They're not set up to deal with that, right? But the problem is neither is anybody else. Nobody is particularly set up to deal with this situation, particularly with the Central Americans, right? That as bad as it is for the longer term residents who are our neighbors, they at least have some allies on the outside. The Central Americans that I have come across are largely on their own, or if they haven't any sort of family that could help them, they're in California, they're in New York, or they're in Houston. Those seem to be the spots in our country where people might have relatives. So they're just on their own, and I have not been able to find an organization that is particularly well set up to deal with like the direct advocacy for individuals, which frankly is why so many people have been living in my basement. But my church has set up a fund to help, and so if we're going to pass the hat, it's Emmaus Lutheran Church in Racine, Wisconsin, has a Good Samaritan Fund, and the good people at Voces de la Frontera have been helping. The good people at Wisdom, anybody here a Wisdom member? Do we have a Wisdom chapter in town? Yeah, I'm a member of the Racine Interfaith Coalition. That's a Wisdom affiliate, and we have an immigration task force. They have helped us, and what we do is we find out about one of these people, and we just go crazy. We try and raise money to pay for their bond and get them out of jail, and then do refugee resettlement. I'm a Lutheran. Lutherans are good at refugee resettlement, right? Usually there's government funding and like protocols and stuff. We've just been doing it by the seat of our pants in our town, right? So the short answer to your question is give money to my church.
Here's the next question.
I'm Bob Dick from Oregon Township. You said that there were known solutions for the corruption problems in Central America that are not being applied. What are those solutions?
And I'm not an expert on them, but I can give you a couple of examples where we've worked on this, right? So, I'm looking around at my audience. You remember a time when you didn't want to travel to Bogota, Colombia, or Medellin, or Cartagena, right? These are all cities in Colombia that you are free to visit today, right? They're fine. And that didn't happen by magic. That happened because of good policies. And it wasn't just one policy, it was a coordinated set of policies designed to reduce violence. And it worked. It can be done. During the period after the signing of the peace accords in Guatemala, when the UN was still paying attention, we were able to do a lot. But what happens is the rest of the world gets bored with these places and stops paying such close attention. And if you're a transnational criminal network, what are you looking for? You're looking for a place where the government institutions look a little bit wobbly and weak, right? And so you move in and you infiltrate those institutions, and pretty soon you own them. So rather than pretending like I know what all the strategies are, I'll just say that even I know people who know what they are. Like some of my friends work in this area. It's not that it can't be done. There are a lot of things that have to be done. You have to work on education. You have to work on conflict resolution. You have to do a variety of things. Transparency is super important. But arresting people is nice. Giving protection to judges was really important. You can't let people know who the judges and the lawyers are because the gangs will kill them, right? But there are ways to give anonymity to those people, and then you can get prosecutions, right? It's not that people don't know how to solve the problems. It's that there's no political will and nobody wants to foot the bill. But I can tell you what, it's a lot cheaper than detaining millions of people. Nothing is more expensive than putting people in jail and feeding them crappy food.
What's the name of your church?
Emmaus, we spell it Spanish, Emmaus. We're a bilingual congregation, M-E-M-A-U-S, Emmaus in Spanish. If you're a Christian type, Jesus, after his resurrection but before his ascension, goes on the road to Emmaus with some disciples who don't recognize him. E-M-A-U-S, Lutheran Church. Is there something to write with? I'll write it up there.
Yeah, we can do that. I just want to make a quick announcement. Mary Hollister of OAP had a great idea. She was motioning to me. I'm gonna pass this around. It says OAP donations, but we're gonna fill this with some money and we can give it to
For
you
my
right
Good
now.
Samaritan Fund.
So I'm gonna start it off with $20. Be generous. There you
I
go.
got 3 guys right now who need bonds.
Thank you.
Okay, Marcel Toma from the Village of Oregon. And I guess if, in your ideal world, what would a new immigration system look like?
Oh. This is, in fact, a little bit like the other question in that it's not really rocket science, and it's not that people don't know what it should look like, right? And it should be separated out. On the one hand, you just need a lot more visas. How about we equalize the number of visas to the number of employers who want to give visas, right? That's something that should have been done ages ago. And the history of why that didn't happen is real interesting. It has to do with the emergence of the Tea Party inside of the Republican Party. Everybody who had any power in the Republican Party wanted immigration reform because all the Chamber of Commerce types were in the Republican Party, right? And those people know that they need access to labor. And so the obvious thing is to give out more visas, right? And that's a kind of low-hanging fruit, no-brainer, right? Militarizing the border actually works against the types who want to limit immigration because in the beginning, the people who migrated mostly were doing it for economic reasons. So you would, let's say you've got a family like mine, we've got a huge family, who do you pick in your family to go? Well, it's usually like the strongest, healthiest, smartest, often man, because he's less vulnerable, right? Okay, you don't want him to be gone forever, the family needs him, right? So he would go and he would work for a season, then he'd come back, he'd go, come back, right? You militarize the border, what does he have to do? He's got to stay in the United States in order for the family to continue to receive those remittances. Now you've got two choices. Either the family is permanently divided and you've just lost your strongest, smartest, healthiest person, and you're hoping that he doesn't forget that you're alive and he keeps sending those remittances south, or the whole family has to go. And both of those things happened, right? And settle permanently in the United States. So obviously creating visa programs where people, I'm an employer, I want to give you a job, you're a potential employee in Guatemala, you would love to work on a dairy farm, I'm just going to make it easy and I'm going to equalize the number of, employees that the dairy farmers in Wisconsin need and the apple pickers in Wisconsin need with the number of people who want those jobs. That's super easy, right? My feeling though is that's totally different from refugee policy. And to me, if somebody is fleeing violence, and I don't care whether it's domestic violence or political violence, or what we have right now is just criminal violence, if your country can't keep you safe and you come knocking on our country, that's not immigration policy, right? We're gonna let you in and we're gonna make a safe place for you. I think we need to separate those out, right? And then that's obviously a separate issue from what do you do with millions and millions of people here in the United States who are essentially neighbors, ought to be citizens by now because they've been here long enough to have gained citizenship if that were an option. And the thing to do there is what Reagan did in '86 and just a general amnesty for almost everybody, and then, get those people on the track to becoming wonderful, enormously patriotic U.S. citizens, the same way every other group of immigrants who's been given that shot becomes, right? As a group, it's an absolute win-win. So that's a three-prong answer to that question. Those are three totally different groups of people, right? But again, it's not rocket science, right? It's not that we don't know how to fix immigration in this country. We just politically can't seem to get there, right?
I think I'm next for the question. Ro Parker, Town of Oregon, member of Holy Mother of Consolation Church. I'm really surprised to hear there are 2 detention centers in Wisconsin. That's the biggest thing I've learned in the last several weeks, and thank you for coming. My question is, what is the Catholic Church, the Milwaukee and Madison Archdiocese, doing to support you and the other people trying to help people in the Dodge and Kenosha detention centers? Financially, people-wise, staff, money, whatever.
Well, I'm Lutheran, so I don't know if I'm like the right person to answer Catholic questions. Catholic
Well, you were
Charities-
Catholics at one time, and I've just been reading German history, so I couldn't pass that up. But I guess I'm concerned as a member of the Catholic Church. I think there's a lot of people who do not realize this is going on in Wisconsin. Many of us want to take responsibility. We want to be accountable. And that I thought you might have some insight in terms of what the Catholic congregations might be doing.
I have a little. I'm not at the congregation level. So there's an organization that's not Catholic, but Catholics do participate a lot, called ICDI. It's out of Chicago, and they do this spiritual visitation. So they're in the detention centers. They come, they listen. By law, they are not allowed to advocate for the detainees. They can refer a detainee to an advocacy organization like me, right? But they can't advocate. So ICDI has told me not to get trained and go into prison with them because I could threaten their status. By law, they have a right to go in if they're only providing spiritual guidance. But if you cross the line and you start finding a way for people to pay their bond and actually get out of detention, then the whole operation can be put at risk. And there are some fantastic nuns in my town that are a part of that program. And they go, they put like $10 in everybody's commissary when they come, which makes it slightly more popular. And they do refer out. So those are some of the only people now, besides lawyers, that can get into the detention center to actually physically see what's going on in there. And Catholics are a part of that. Catholic Charities is also a fantastic organization, one of the only ones out there that is helping with legal support and how to become a citizenship, how to become a citizen advice type stuff. At the head of every list of organizations that you should call is Catholic Charities. Problem is, when I've called them, they are swamped because there's just not enough. There's not enough to go around. I don't know if they're doing anything in terms of like a bond fund. I haven't found anybody yet who's doing a bond fund other than my church, which is too small.
I heard some people speak, and it's not practical with the current administration, but hopefully that won't last forever, about having a somewhat like Marshall Plan for those 4 countries that have all of these problems. And if they can't deal with all of the crime, at least they could deal with some of the poverty and the climate change, which has created food shortages and all that. And since we could do it with Europe and get them in good shape, a Marshall-type plan would really help that so that people could stay there and live a decent life. Has that ever been suggested by anybody?
Oh, I think a lot of people are suggesting it. But as you say, the absurdity of suggesting that at the present moment, right? But again, it's not that we don't know how to do it, and I think it's pretty cost effective, right? What's expensive is what we're doing right now.
Right.
Just think at the level of the people who have to leave. Each individual who has the $8,000 to $10,000 to pay the coyote, that's like a smuggler, to get yourself, from point A to point B. What if we invested that instead in economic development, right? And if you're able to combat some of the problems, like you say, with being able to get prosecutions for people who actually commit crimes, right? Well, then nobody's more entrepreneurial than people from this part of the world. And everybody starts businesses, and you don't actually even need that much in terms of direct aid, but you have to be able to ensure that if people start a business, that they're not going to become victims of extortion, right? And that if they don't pay, they're going to get murdered, which is very often the case. The people who are coming here are very often extortion victims.
Next question.
Hi, Marilyn McDowell from Oregon. Where is the Dodge County facility? Juneau?
Yeah,
It's in Juneau?
I believe that's
That's
right.
not all that, Waupun?
It's in the town, but it's not the Waupun prison, it's
No.
another prison that's separate.
Okay, thank you.
I've not been.
All
I
right.
just get phone calls.
The reason I ask is that's not all that far away, 45 minutes or so. A lot of protests in the last day or so have been going on at the ICE facility in Milwaukee. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I see no reason why this area, including Columbia, Dodge County, can't get enough people together to protest at these facilities for whatever, reason we need to. And also use that to raise awareness and raise support, more bond money, whatever. So I see that opportunity in this area.
We've absolutely done it in Kenosha. We did it before they took my pastor, and then when they took my pastor, you guys might have read about that, because that made the national news when they deported my pastor. And we got a whole bunch of clergy to come out and protest in front of the Kenosha County Detention Center. And people started paying attention, and for the very first time I started running into Kenosans who knew that we had a detention center on Highway H, right? They deliberately put them out of the way so that people can't see it. When you're doing it, I would just ask that you remember that it's pretty hard for the good guys that are on the inside to go to work every day. And so you want to make a point of saying, you guys who are in there working with these detainees, we love you, you're wonderful, kiss, 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 thank you, please keep being such a wonderful person. You don't want to turn them into the enemies, right? Same thing with all the people at the ICE facility in Milwaukee. In fact, all the guys that I've met inside of that building are super. They're just wonderful people. And I always feel a little bit bad. I want to make sure that they know, like, we're not protesting against you. We're protesting against what this structure is doing, what this institution. So I would just ask, when you do that, make a point. Go out of your way to say, you people who are working here, we're not angry at you as individuals. Thank you for taking care of these people. You're the only ones who can talk to them. Thank you for being there and listening to them and being kind to them, right? And attending to their medical needs. But this has got to stop, and the people in the area need to know. And the reason that Dodge and Kenosha have these facilities is because we make money off of it, right? Our sheriff is super proud, and the Dodge facility local politicians are similarly super proud of the income that the local area receives. Ours is not quite $6 million, but our sheriff likes to throw that number around, that we get $6 million a year off of the detention facility. And he's going to point out that that's $6 million that he doesn't have to get from taxes, right? So all the Kenosha area residents benefit from that business, right, that's going on there. The truth is, it's $6 million gross, not net. It costs a lot to house these people, and you have to get extra staff and everything. And our sheriff, at least, is not willing to share the numbers in terms of like how much in terms of extra expenditures he's getting. But absolutely, if you raise awareness in the area and you say, look, do we really want to be benefiting as taxpayers? Is it really worth this much money, however much it really is, because they're not even telling us how much we're actually earning? Wouldn't we all rather pay a little bit more in taxes rather than know that this is blood money that we're, I for sure would rather pay in taxes rather than get it from the federal government. Those are your taxes too, right? It's just kind of a circuitous route.
Next question here.
My name's Danette Pyre, and I live here in the village of Oregon.
And our family knows people who have lived in Guatemala and also in Honduras. My brother was in the Peace Corps in Honduras for 2 years. And I just wonder if there's been this disconnect, if some of these people might be trying to reach out to us here in the United States, knowing that we're here, because we had foreign exchange students from Guatemala who stayed with my parents and family members for a number of years. And we don't know, you know, I was out of the house when these kids came, but I have no idea if they're trying to reach out to us at all, and how could we reach out to them or find out if they have come up here and are located in some of these detention centers and have no connection to us, and we don't know they're here, and is there some way that we can find out if they're located somewhere here in the United States?
It will be hard. So the first part, might they be here and might they be trying to get in touch with you? Maybe. Of course, the very first thing that they do when they catch you is they take away your stuff, and that includes your cell phone. So unless you have the perspicacity to memorize all the numbers of your contacts in the United States, or write them in pen on your body, that's a really good strategy. But you had to have known, like you had to have said in advance, I might get caught, I better memorize these numbers, or I might get caught, so I better ink this stuff onto me, right? So sure, it's totally possible that they're in the United States somewhere, their phone's in the ICE, you know, locker, and they don't remember your phone number and they can't reach you. In terms of you finding them, if you don't have their alien number, it's hard. There's an online resource called the ICE Detainee Locator. It's really quick in terms of finding where somebody is if you have their alien number. It's kind of like your social security number. But if you don't, you're putting in their name and their place of birth and their date of birth, and I have yet to find somebody that way. There's almost always a letter that's wrong or something to where the ICE Detainee Locator, yeah, that some names get misspelled, and it's just really hard. A friend of mine, his mom never wanted him to know how old she was. He didn't know his mother's birthday, so he couldn't find his own mom in the ICE Detainee Locator system, because they came and they took her when he was not in the house, right? And his dad had already been deported.
Here's the next question.
Stephanie, thank you for coming and for shedding some light on this issue. One thing, an earlier comment, the cost of the war in Iraq, 15 times more than the Marshall Plan. What are we getting for that? A couple questions. Is climate change affecting immigration patterns at all? And secondly, what can people do in terms of are you looking for sponsors or people that might be willing to help someone trying to?
Those are great, yes, and I love the point about where are our priorities in this country. Yeah, the solutions to these problems are not anywhere near as expensive as other stuff that we somehow or other always end up paying for, right? And what we're doing right now is massively expensive. I am confident that fixing the problems in Central America is cheaper than building the wall and detaining, you know, all of these people all over the country. I won't even get started. I got so angry, I'm forgetting your next point. I'm remembering about what can we do? You had a
So whether climate change is impacting
climate
immigration?
change,
And
yeah.
secondly, whether there are ways in which we can offer help for finding sponsors or?
So climate change is such a tricky one, right? To what extent is climate change affecting Central America? Obviously, you know, a Hurricane Mitch comes around and you're going to ask all the meteorologists and they're going to hem and they're haw and they're going to say, well, the chances of, you know, weather events like these just rises dramatically with climate change. How many of the people that are coming right now left because of a hurricane, not so many. It's mostly, at least the cases that I'm seeing, it's mostly extreme poverty, lack of opportunity, surplus of violence, and for many, people who are actually fleeing violence on their person or members of their family, like an imminent threat, right? That doesn't mean that climate change isn't affecting the area. The only area of Guatemala that I know well used to have forests, and so we used to have rain. And back in the war, the U.S. decided to promote deforestation so that the guerrillas wouldn't have any place to hide, and now it's deforested, and now there's no rain. So does that cause economic dislocation? Of course. A couple steps down the line, does that mean somebody's going to end up on our southern border? Yeah, but how do you connect the dots to climate change? It's hard to do. In terms of can you become sponsors? Again, these organizations are just not set up to do this work. But do I periodically need somebody who's willing to be the person who goes to Milwaukee and pays the bond and puts their name on the piece of paper that says I paid the bond? Yeah, I do need people to do that. Do I need people to, give me a lot of money to pay somebody's bond? I need that too. But to say that BOSIS is actually doing that work or that Wisdom is doing that work would be misleading, because I can't find anybody that's doing that work. When we've done it, it's just been individuals that are in all of these organizations throwing everything against the wall and saying, we got to rescue this kid before he gets deported on Tuesday, right? And getting, the guy who was supposed to come with me tonight, who couldn't come because he was taking another asylum seeker to the bus station, I got him out the day before his last court date. Like, we were just scrambling to find the money. It's a mess. So yeah, we have all kinds of need. What we really need, though, is an organization that's set up to do this, and I'm still working on that. I'm still working on trying to get organizational partners that can build the capacity to take care of this kind of crazy problem. We've got about 150 in each detention facility at any given time.
Here's the next question.
I'm Al Brown. I'm from Oregon and Tucson, Arizona. We get to see both sides of things here. In Wisconsin and the northern part of the country, we're very ignorant of what goes on. In fact, as a country in itself, we are ignorant of what goes on in our own country with our own officials. For instance, what the hell are these judges doing? How do they sleep at night when they just automatically, get out of here, go on, back into jail, back into jail. They know what's going on, but someplace along the line, they haven't been informed. We as individuals, we appreciate you coming up and telling everybody what's going on, and then ascertaining from that we've got a problem here. We're not, excuse the phrase, lily white. We're dirty just like every place else in the world. But if you get to travel around, bribery and corruption is a way that the world works. We look down on it, or actually we look away from it more purposely. And I'd like to know just exactly how we as a citizenry can approach that and say, this isn't right.
Vote, yeah. I think we do need to hang on to the reality that people still come to the United States because it's still better here for most people here than it is in Tegucigalpa right now, right? This guy that I was telling you that was going to come with me tonight, every day, not a day goes by that he says, oh my God, I love this country. I love this country so much. This jerk in our town stole his car. And guess what you do in this country when somebody steals your car? You call the police. And you know what the police do? They go find your car. He was stunned. They didn't ask for a bribe at any point. They just tried to figure out who was telling the truth. And within about an hour, they figured out that it was us. And figured out where the car was and whose nephew had taken it, and apologized to us and said, well, he's 16. I can't actually do very much to him. But here's your car back. There was a backpack in it with a new pair of tennis shoes. I said, this isn't ours. He says, it is now. That's the level of corruption that we observed in the Racine Police Department. Having said that, I know that there is corruption in the Racine Police Department. There are lots of fine officers there, but my son-in-law went to work for them and he quit at the end of the first week because he says, I'm not going to work for an organization like this. His standards are higher than the guy who came from Tegucigalpa, right? He has different standards. And so I think what you're pointing to is we want higher standards, right? We want fair maps so that our citizenry elect our representatives and not the other way around, right? And so I think what you're doing is the right thing. We all have to join together. We have to decide what we're going to work on, and we have to get out there and make sure that when the election comes around, everybody votes. And that means parking yourself outside the laundromat and registering everybody who comes out, right? And the dollar store, and overcoming the enormous segregation in our society, right? So that the people who are hit hardest by the corruption in our system understand that they have the power to overturn it, right?
A couple more questions, here and here.
I thought of one while you're speaking here. So I have heard that to be the path to legal citizenship in this country can cost upwards of $10,000 just to do the paperwork and hire a lawyer and figure out the system, and not getting out of detention centers, but just the process if you're here and you're not being detained to become a citizen, and that it's a lengthy process. And I don't, if you could kind of clarify if that's the case, and I would encourage people to get the facts about what it takes to have the legal path to citizenship in this country.
I have never, ever had anyone complain to me about the cost of becoming a citizen. People are willing to do virtually anything, pay whatever you have to pay in order to legalize your status. The problem is most people can't. There's simply not a legal way to adjust your status for most people. So this is one of the most vicious lies. People say things like, just get in line, but there isn't one. People say, well, why don't you do it legally? And it's because you can't. It's this crazy immigration system that we have that simply is not making enough of those slots available, and for the people who are here, not creating any way for you to legalize your status. And people are shocked when they find out, well, I'm married to a citizen. Yeah, well, that doesn't mean that you can automatically legalize your status. I know a woman whose husband is deported, and she has to choose for the next 10 years whether she is going to live in the United States with her kids and no husband, or uproot the kids and move to Mexico while he waits out his 10 years before he can apply for status, and he's married to a U.S. citizen. Our laws are nuts, and nobody knows about it, right? It's that immigration reform that needs to happen to fix this crazy, stupid system that nobody even knows about, and if they do, they're like, why is it that way? It's that way because we haven't been able to fix it yet, even though the leadership in both parties has for a long time been in favor of fixing it. We haven't been able to do it because this Tea Party thing meant that the rational ones started losing their primaries, right? And then the whole Republican Party was in crisis and divided, and all of a sudden you couldn't vote for immigration reform and keep your seat in Congress. And there are good people. Paul Ryan was my congressman, and he tried for a very, very long time to get immigration reform. And a lot of people said some nasty things about him. Some of them are okay, right? But it's not that he didn't want immigration reform. He knows what's wrong, and he wanted to fix it, and he couldn't. He couldn't do it. Even as the Speaker of the House of Representatives, with a Senate that would go for it, he couldn't do it.
Last question, I think.
Right, I think you kind of touched on I don't think it's the Tea Party, because the Democrats had control for a while too, and they didn't address immigration reform. I've written to Mark Pocan and Senator Baldwin. They don't seem to be interested in reforming it, and I don't know why. As far as, I have friends who adopted children from foreign countries. It's terrible. To get them citizenship, it's terrible. There's no excuse for what they had to go through and the cost. I don't know what it cost. But like you say, nobody seems to, I don't know, want to do it. Why don't they want to do it? What's the problem, the deep down? And I think it's nonpartisan, truly.
Well, I'm glad you asked, and if you have patience, I'd love to just briefly run through the history here. So when I say it was the Tea Party, I mean that historically in the 90s, right? Under Bush 2, right? Who really, really wanted immigration reform, sensible, immigration reform. And everybody who was anybody, Karl Rove wanted immigration reform, all of the people that you guys probably think are public enemies, all wanted immigration reform, right? So the question is, okay, why on earth did it happen? If the whole Democratic Party wanted immigration reform, and Karl Rove wanted it, and George Bush wants it, and he's president, why didn't we get it?
What is reform?
It would have been something that we could all have lived with, right? I mean, they would have thrown more stupid money at the border, but in exchange, we would have gotten an amnesty, we would have gotten more visas, we would have got a system that was, 85% rational, as opposed to 2% rational, which it is right now. So when I say the Tea Party was the problem, it's because that in the 90s is when that sort of populist upswelling, it was a down-up thing that happened inside the Republican Party. I don't know if you remember, right? And all of a sudden, these Republican candidates, typical old school, been there forever Republican candidates started losing their primaries to these radicals, right? That were being supported by the Tea Parties, right? And so all of a sudden, it became really hard to win your primary unless you at least sort of nodded to those nativist, hysterical kind of things, right? And there's some individuals, Mitch McConnell is a favorite, Stephen Miller is a favorite, Newt Gingrich, there are these individuals who understood how politically juicy immigration can be. And I think that has to do actually with very deep human psychology. You identify an other, you label them as a threat or a contagion, and all of a sudden people's, biology kind of takes over and they don't see anything else. Oh, it's a threat. We have to maintain the purity of the us against the dangerous invasion of the them, right? So politically this is just super, super effective. And all of a sudden even people who rationally, like Paul Ryan, wanted immigration reform that we would have voted for, we would have said okay to this, couldn't get it, and they couldn't even say that they wanted it sometimes because then they would lose their primaries. So Bush tried really quite hard to get it and failed. Obama came in, and lots of people are confused about this, because Obama deported so many people, the reporter-in-chief, right? Well, that had to do with, okay, so you've got a situation where he's in the presidency with a supermajority in Congress. He could have done it then, right? Forget the Tea Party. He could have just done immigration reform, boom. And we know that he thought about it, and he chose healthcare, not immigration, to attack first, right? Because he had so much support, especially in the Senate, among Republicans for immigration reform. He thought, I don't need a supermajority to do immigration reform. I've got people that I can work with across the aisle on immigration reform. They all want it, we all want it, this is easy, right? So he made this like gentleman's agreement with the Republicans, especially in the Senate, and said, okay, I'm going to start enforcing the law as it exists to give you guys political cover, right? We will be now enforcing the law, right? That was the whole thing, right? And then you're going to give me immigration reform. And they didn't. And they didn't. And by that time, there was already ICE, right? I mean, when that happened, you look back at the record. He put the brakes on it, reined in ICE, said you're only allowed to go after people that are like really a threat to society, only criminals or whatever. And the head of ICE hated it. He hated President Obama, and he hated the policies that didn't let him enforce the law, right? But Obama was essentially stuck with it, and it's this huge stain on his reputation, right? When it was really people, especially in the Senate, who double-crossed him, right? But in their defense, what are they going to do? It's their own constituency that won't let them vote for it, right? It's us that's the problem. It's not really our representatives. Who do they represent? They represent us. So until we start demanding something different, we're going to keep getting this kind of garbage.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap it up. Thank you so much. I'm happy to say we have raised $451.
Thank you.
So take that to your church and do
A
good
Good
with it.
Samaritan Fund.
There
If you
you
want to
go.
send it to us in the mail, we'll take it that way too. 1925 Summit Avenue, Racine, Wisconsin.
We'll put that on our website.
Yeah, it'll be in the tape too of the WOW, cable access. If you want to watch it again later, you can do it that way also.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for coming. Are you gonna stick around a little bit afterward
I'm
to
hungry.
answer questions? Yeah, get some food. It's good food here. Or we're afterwards. We might be going to Mulligan's. Anyone who wants to come join a Cubs game and just general hanging out. So, hang on a second, Judy. So, there's only 4 people that I have slips for, so this shouldn't take too long, but some of these comments are appropriate to the topic. So the first person I'm calling up is Christine, I'm going to kill your name, Gudviren Getz.
Anybody else
Okay.
have anything they want to add to open mic? Let me know.
Hi, I'm Christine. I want to tell you something, a little way if you could want to help immigrants. I'm an intern at the Literacy Network in town. It's on South Park Street. I've been there for about 7 years. When I started 7 years ago, most of the learners were Spanish speaking from Mexico. And in the past few years, we've seen a huge influence of learners from Venezuela and Colombia. It kind of tells you what's going on in the world. But I've also worked with learners from Cuba, Peru, El Salvador, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Nepal, Somalia. Obviously, you don't have to speak those languages, because I do not speak all of those languages. You simply have to speak English. The Literacy Network serves 1,000 low-income, that's really the main criteria, low-income learners every year. They've got a small staff, about 28, about 900 volunteers. So if you think of all the volunteers that work 2 to 3 hours a week at even minimum wage, you can imagine how much money that would have cost them. They have sites in 34 locations, mostly schools, community centers, and libraries. So if you're at all interested in tutoring, it really is just a wonderful organization, highly respected nationally, and we can put their website is litnet.org. And if you even can, every other week for 2 hours, help someone learn English, it's a tremendously rewarding association.
Thank you. Next, so there's 3 more are going to be Barb Feeney, also with a topical comment, followed by Ro Parker, and Charlie Upoff can end us up with a poem.
Hello. First of all, if you haven't signed in, I'm going to ask you to do that. We do not hound you very much, hardly at all. But you can opt in to get a text reminder about our open mics. And we just use this, we don't share this data with anybody. We just use it to kind of track how we're doing and who's coming to our events and all that. So if you haven't signed in, please do. Then on the topic of refugees, there's just a couple things I want to share about what's going on in the Madison area. One is there's an organization called Open Doors for Refugees that supports refugees in the Madison area in a variety of ways. I'm not going to go into it, but you can just look them up, and they do need volunteer help. So there are ways you can help refugees in that way. There's another group of people.
We're going to be at our first Monday in November.
That's right. They're going to be at People's Church November 4th. I think it's November 4th. Open Doors is going to be there to talk about what they do, and this is an event open to the public. You can come for the potluck at 11 or just come for the speaker at 12 o'clock. Another thing that's going on in the Madison area is there's a group of people who drive immigrants to appointments with, to get them to court. And the trips usually involve going either to Chicago or Milwaukee. And I happen to have, just by coincidence, a nephew-in-law who's an immigration lawyer. And he said one big reason people get deported is because they don't get to their appointment with the court. And the way it works is you get a little training, and then you just get on a list, and they send out an email when they need somebody. And if you can do it, you just say, I can do it, and you do it. It's like a one-day thing, but it's a really important thing. And as a driver, you're there to get people there and then just be a supportive presence. You don't have any other obligations. Just kind of hang out, wait for them while they get their court date, and be an encouraging person. Another thing I just want to remind you all is that a year from now, we're going to have an opportunity to end this madness. And I really hope you are all sitting here thinking, what will I do next year to elect some people who can end this madness? We have to find a political solution in our own country to get off of this horrible track we seem to be on. That's all.
Thank you, Amanda. Roe Parker, Anderson Park Friends. I serve as president on the board. Tonight I have a boatload of good news for you. The key words are onions, dogs, farms, and here's the kicker, Germans. So I want to report on a couple things. You can't, don't go away, you want to really hear this. In terms of onions, Anderson Park Friends partnered with the Oregon Area Food Pantry. We built our food pantry garden. This summer we raised onions because they are good for storage. The poundage, the number that I'm proud to report to you, it's not 50 pounds. It's not 200 pounds. It's not even 300 pounds. It's 370 pounds of onions that we were able to raise this summer based on your donations, Oregon Area Progressive, Nancy, Susan, Barb, Beth, any number of people in this room were instrumental. That's where the onions come involved. The next thing is the dogs. We have been an advocate for a dog park here in Oregon, Wisconsin at the Anderson Farm County Park just south of the village limits. I'm glad to report that the county government took a concrete step last night. They approved a contract for over $50,000 to do the final specifications and planning for the building of the dog park. So let's hear it for that. We're getting our taxpayer money back. We're building a dog park. Some of the work will be done this particular fall. Most of the work will be done next year. If we keep our fingers crossed and Mother Nature cooperates, there might be a slim chance we can open this up late fall of next year. So we can hear the dogs bark at the park, hopefully next year. farms come in because Anderson Park Friends is having their annual meeting this next Wednesday night at the Town of Oregon Town Hall, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. You are all invited. You do not need to be a member. It's a potluck, bring a dish to pass. We're featuring John Peck. John Peck is a grower, and he is a grower at Silverwood County Park as well as with the Family Farm Defenders program. He's their director. He's going to be talking about market garden farming at our annual meeting. You're all invited to come hear about plans to build a farm at the park. Next Wednesday night, 6 to 8 p.m. I'm sure you'll be intrigued with this. This will be a big goal for 2020. So we've had the onions, we've had the dogs, we've had the farms, and now for the Germans. I'm taking off my Anderson Park Friends hat and putting on my Dane County Kassel Germany partnership hat. This is a county committee. We do different music and art exchanges with Germany. I'm proud to announce that we're bringing into town next week for a 10-day stint the Edgar Connect Trio. We have different flyers that are around that are available for you. They're doing a concert at the Stoughton Opera House on Tuesday, September 17th. These individuals have won international awards in the jazz music arena. For a $15 ticket, you can't get a ticket this reasonable and economical. Rolling Stone tickets are going for about $500 or $600 at the latest tour. Don't miss this opportunity. They'll be at different places. We are also going to be bringing them into Oregon High School to do a workshop with the Oregon High School music students next week as well. We want to expose them. Oregon has a great tradition between Germany and the state of Hessen. The different exchanges go on. This is just part of an ongoing thing. Onions, dogs, farms, and Germans. If you got questions, want more, let me know. I'd be glad to talk with you. Thank you.
All right, Charlie, come finish us out with a poem. Is this an original one? Yes.
So this is a poem that is, I think, relevant to our conversation tonight. It's one that actually got me a little bit emotional too, but I think I'm just outraged of what's happening on our border. The children lie neath mylar sheets on cement floors. In dusty streets, through steel cages, mothers cry. What did we do, and what did I? Across the street, a city grows, a sea of tents in solemn rows. The children, guards, and toddlers too, all cry out, what did we do? And still a voice is called me, what did I? What did we do?
All right, that pretty much wraps up our program. Thank you so much for coming. You'll be getting, if you're on our email list, you'll get a notice about next month's first Friday in October. It's escaping me now what we've got planned, but I'm sure it's awesome. Watch your email.